My mother slept with my fiancé and came back begging. With a crazy request, my life cracked open during what was supposed to be a joyful rehearsal dinner, the kind filled with clinking glasses and nervous laughter about tomorrow's vows. Linda, my mother, pulled me aside near the back hallway of the restaurant, her face pale in a way that immediately made my stomach tighten. She told me, in a low trembling voice, that she had slept with Jason the week before. Jason was my fiancé for years, the man I was meant to marry the next day. At first, I honestly thought she was playing some kind of cruel joke, because the words didn't make sense together in my head. Then I saw the shame in her eyes, real and undeniable, and my world tilted. She rushed through explanations I didn't ask for, insisting it had just happened, that neither of them meant for it to go that far, as if intention could soften something that violent. What hurt almost as much as the confession itself was the way she reached for my hand afterward, squeezing it gently like we were going to connect over this, like this was a shared secret instead of a knife in my chest. I remember pulling my hand back slowly, staring at her like I didn't recognize her anymore. The noise of the dinner felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater while my life collapsed in silence. I walked outside to find Jason leaning against a brick wall with his groomsmen, cigarette smoke curling around him like nothing had changed. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He shrugged, actually shrugged, and said my mother came onto him and he'd been weak. The casualness of it stunned me more than anger did. He spoke about sleeping with his future mother-in-law, the way someone might talk about having dessert before dinner. Indulgent but harmless. That was the moment something inside me went completely cold. I canceled the wedding that same night. I sent a mass text to every guest saying it was off. No explanations, just finality. By morning, I'd packed what I could carry and moved out of the apartment we'd shared. I blocked Jason and Linda on every platform, every phone number, every possible doorway back into my life. The grief came in waves after that, but so did clarity. Within 6 months, I was promoted to regional manager, earning double what Jason ever had. I bought a townhouse of my own, adopted 2 rescue cats, and started therapy with Dr. Harris, who helped me understand things I'd been blind to for years. Through therapy, I started seeing my childhood differently. Linda had always competed with me, even when I was too young to name it. She wore revealing outfits to my graduations, flirted openly with my high school boyfriends, and treated every milestone of mine like a stage she deserved to stand on. Sleeping with Jason wasn't some spontaneous lapse. It was the largest, ugliest expression of a pattern that had existed my entire life. Realizing that didn't erase the pain, but it gave it context. And that mattered more than I expected. 8 months after the wedding never happened, Linda showed up unannounced at my office. She wasn't there to apologize. She was crying, frantic, and immediately asked me for help. She wanted me to talk to Jason because he wasn't returning her calls. The audacity hit me so hard I laughed out loud before I could stop myself. Then she explained they'd been seeing each other since I canceled the wedding. That they were in love. That age didn't matter when you were soulmates. She looked me straight in the eye and asked me to be her maid of honor. She went on like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. She wanted my vendors, my venue, my plans. She said the location might even give them the same date since I'd canceled so late. She'd already told the family I was being supportive and mature about everything. She had posted online about my supposed grace, cropping me out of engagement photo locations and inserting herself instead. Then she showed me her hand. She was wearing my grandmother's ring, the one my grandmother had given me on her deathbed. Linda said Jason thought I'd want her to have it. I stayed calm in that moment in a way that surprised even me. I told her I needed time to process and asked her to leave. For the next 2 weeks, she bombarded me with messages about cake tastings and dress fittings. She sent me links to outfits labeled Mother of the Bride and asked if they made her look too young. I finally met with my best friend, Olivia, who worked as a party planner, and we spent hours mapping out what I needed to do. I also reached out quietly to family members and learned Linda had been lying extensively, telling everyone I'd begged her to take Jason off my hands. One aunt revealed something that made my skin crawl. Linda had been pursuing Jason for years, showing up at his gym, texting him constantly, planting the seeds long before the betrayal ever came to light. Armed with that truth, I agreed to meet Linda at a restaurant. She launched immediately into talk about centerpieces and color palettes. I let her ramble for 5 minutes, then slid my phone across the table. On it was a post I'd just published, detailing everything she'd done, every lie, every betrayal. She tried to grab my phone, panicking, demanding I take it down. She cried about her reputation, about how Jason would leave her if there was drama. When I stood to go, she grabbed my wrist and told me there was something else. She was pregnant. Jason didn't know yet, and she begged me to help her. I looked down at her hand, gripping my arm, at my grandmother's ring, gleaming there like a theft made visible. I told her calmly that none of it was my problem. Then I walked out and didn't look back. The post spread through the family faster than I expected. Relatives who'd believed her lies started calling to apologize. My grandmother's sister threatened legal action over the ring. Jason's parents learned the truth and were horrified. For the first time since that rehearsal dinner, I felt like the story was no longer being told for me by someone else. It was painful and messy, but it was finally honest, and that honesty became the foundation of the life I was rebuilding. 3 weeks after my post rippled through the family, Linda tried to regain control of the narrative the only way she knew how. She announced her pregnancy publicly, posting glowing captions about new beginnings and unexpected love, as if rewriting the timeline could erase what she'd done. Jason followed soon after with a stiff, overly formal proposal, complete with staged photos that felt more like damage control than romance. From the outside, it might have looked like a whirlwind love story. From where I stood, it looked like 2 people desperately trying to outrun the consequences of their choices. What Linda didn't expect was that the truth had a way of attracting more truth. A few weeks after everything blew up, I received a message from a woman named Megan, Jason's ex-girlfriend from college. She said she'd seen my post and felt sick reading it because it confirmed something she'd suspected for years. Megan explained that I wasn't the first woman Jason had been involved with who was significantly older and financially established. According to her, Jason had a pattern of attaching himself to women who could elevate his lifestyle or career. Linda had money. I had potential. In her words, we were both targets, just at different stages. I forwarded Megan's message and screenshots anonymously to Linda. At first, she dismissed it as jealousy or sabotage, but doubt crept in anyway. Over time, she started noticing things she'd ignored before. Jason's wandering attention, the unexplained absences, the way his eyes followed younger women in restaurants, the casual entitlement he had toward her credit cards. 6 months into her pregnancy, she called me in tears, her voice cracking as she admitted Jason had been cheating with a woman from his office. The woman was 23. I listened in silence as she unraveled, talking about how alone she felt, how everyone hated her, how she didn't know what to do. When she finally paused, waiting for comfort, I told her the truth as plainly as I could. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Then I ended the call. A few months later, she gave birth to a baby girl. Jason signed away his parental rights and moved out of state with the woman from his office, disappearing from Linda's life as abruptly as he'd once disappeared from mine. Sometimes photos of the baby, Lily, surfaced on social media. She had my eyes, my smile, the same soft round cheeks I'd seen in old pictures of myself. I didn't reach out. I wasn't ready, and I refused to force myself into a role shaped by guilt instead of choice. My life, meanwhile, kept expanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Therapy helped me rebuild my sense of self, and a hiking group I'd joined for exercise turned into a real community. That's where I met Ethan. Ethan was steady in a way that felt unfamiliar at first. He listened more than he spoke, respected boundaries without needing them, explained twice, and never made me feel like I was competing for space. Our friendship grew slowly into something deeper, grounded in trust rather than intensity. When we got engaged, it felt quiet and right, not like a performance. He had never met my mother, and he never would. That boundary was non-negotiable, and he supported it without hesitation. 3 months before our wedding, I sat across from Rachel, my wedding planner, in her sunlit office. Fabric swatches and seating charts were spread across the table as we finalized details. She paused mid-sentence and told me the venue had received a call from a woman claiming to be my mother, asking to be added to the vendor contact list. My chest tightened instantly. I felt that familiar drop, the echo of old panic. Rachel said the staff found it odd since my paperwork clearly listed no mother of the bride. I didn't hesitate. Right there in Rachel's office, I started calling every vendor. I instructed them to add Linda to a Do Not Engage list and emailed photos so there would be no confusion. Rachel assured me she'd personally brief venue security and suggested hiring private security for the wedding day. I agreed immediately. It saddened me that it was necessary, but sadness didn't outweigh safety. That evening, Ethan found me sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. When I told him what happened, anger flashed across his face before he pulled me into his arms. I cried harder than I expected, furious that Linda was still trying to insert herself into my life. Ethan didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just held me and promised we'd do whatever it took to protect our day. The following week, I told Dr. Harris about the venue call. He reminded me that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. We talked through grounding techniques and visualized the wedding going smoothly, untouched by disruption. He reinforced that hiring security wasn't an overreaction but a reasonable response to a proven pattern of behavior. I left that session feeling steadier, more anchored in my choices. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from an attorney representing Linda, requesting a meeting to discuss family relationships and Lily's future. The language was careful, but clear. Linda was trying to use legal pressure to force contact. I was furious, not because I felt threatened, but because it proved she still didn't respect my boundaries. I forwarded the letter to my own attorney, who confirmed I had no obligation to respond. She suggested a phone meeting might be useful, if only to understand what Linda was attempting. Against my better instincts, I agreed to a phone meeting with attorneys present. I sat in my car during the call, listening as Linda's lawyer spoke about her struggles as a single parent. I could hear Linda crying in the background, the sound sharp and manipulative. The lawyer suggested Linda hoped I might have a relationship with Lily for the child's benefit. The implication was heavy, unspoken but obvious. She wanted me to step in and help clean up the mess she'd made. My attorney responded calmly, stating my position clearly. I had no interest in a relationship with Linda. Any future decision regarding Lily would be mine alone, on my timeline. When the call ended, my hands were shaking. Hearing Linda cry still triggered something deep, even after everything. That night, Ethan held me as I cried, reminding me that complicated feelings didn't mean I was wrong. The next evening, Olivia showed up with wine and takeout, wrapping me in a hug before I could say a word. She listened as I explained everything, then told me something I needed to hear. Lily's situation wasn't my responsibility. I couldn't destroy my own peace trying to fix the consequences of Linda's betrayal. Other family members could help, and they would. I didn't have to sacrifice myself at my next therapy session. Dr. Harris helped me separate my feelings for Lily from my anger toward Linda. Lily was innocent. Linda wasn't. One day, I might choose to know my half-sister, or I might not. Either choice was valid. What mattered was that it remained my choice. I left that session lighter, clearer, ready to keep moving forward without letting the past dictate every step. The next week at work passed in a blur of meetings and spreadsheets, and I was grateful for the distraction. Numbers were easier than emotions. Late one afternoon, while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my desk, My office phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something made me pick it up. The woman on the line introduced herself as an attorney representing my grandmother's sister. My stomach dropped before she even finished her first sentence. She explained, in a carefully professional tone, that Linda still hadn't returned my grandmother's ring. Multiple letters had been sent requesting its return, all of them ignored. The attorney said they'd waited longer than they normally would out of respect for family ties, but that patience was gone. If the ring wasn't surrendered within 30 days, they were prepared to pursue theft charges. Then she asked, hesitantly, whether I might be willing to speak to Linda and encourage her to do the right thing. I laughed. A short humorless sound that surprised even me. I told the attorney I was probably the worst possible intermediary. Linda and I hadn't spoken directly in over a year, and our last conversation ended with me telling her to live with the consequences of her choices. The attorney sighed, sounding unsurprised, and asked if I could at least provide Linda's current address. I gave it to her from the legal letter I'd received earlier and told her to proceed however she needed to. The ring belonged to the family. Linda had stolen it, and if she faced legal consequences, that was on her. 2 days later, my phone lit up with Linda's name. I stared at it for a long moment before answering, then put it on speaker so Ethan could hear. He was sitting across from me at the kitchen table and nodded when our eyes met. Linda sounded smaller than I remembered, her voice shaky as she begged me to call off my grandmother's sister. She said the threat of criminal charges was too much, that she was already overwhelmed as a single mother and couldn't handle anything else. She claimed the ring was the only valuable thing she had left. I felt my jaw tighten as she spoke. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I told Linda, as evenly as I could, that the ring had been given to me specifically by my dying grandmother. She had no right to keep it. Linda started crying harder, saying she thought of it as a loan, as if borrowing my grandmother's ring to marry my ex-fiancé was a reasonable misunderstanding. The lie was so blatant it almost made me hang up. I took a breath and told her she needed to return the ring immediately. If she faced charges, it would be because of her own actions, not mine. She argued that she needed it, that it was all she had. I could hear Lily making small noises in the background, and my chest tightened painfully. But I didn't let that change what I said. The baby wasn't my responsibility to fix. Linda's crying stopped abruptly, replaced by anger. She accused me of being cruel and unforgiving, of turning the entire family against her over one mistake. I cut her off. Sleeping with my fiancé wasn't a mistake. It was a series of deliberate choices, from pursuing Jason for years to lying to the family and trying to steal my wedding plans. That was cruelty, not an accident. Before she could respond, I told her the conversation was over. She could return the ring or face the consequences. Those were her only options. When she tried one last time, saying Lily deserved to know her sister, I replied quietly that Lily deserved better than growing up watching manipulation and betrayal normalized. Then I ended the call. My hands shook so badly afterward that I nearly dropped my phone. Ethan pulled me into his arms as I cried, not from sadness but from raw, exhausted anger. He told me he was proud of me for standing my ground, for not letting Linda twist the situation again. His support steadied me in a way I didn't take for granted. I'd spent too many years doubting my own boundaries to ignore how different this felt. The next morning, my phone was flooded with missed calls and messages from relatives. When I checked social media, I saw why. Linda had posted publicly, claiming I was trying to have her arrested and deprive her baby of family support. She painted herself as a victim, accusing me of jealousy and cruelty. I felt tired more than angry this time, but I knew I couldn't let the lie stand. I sat down with my laptop and wrote a short, factual post explaining that the ring had been taken without permission, that my grandmother's sister had legal rights to it, and that my boundaries existed because of Linda's actions, not malice. Then I turned my phone off and walked away. When I checked again later, the response was overwhelming. Relatives commented that Linda needed to return the ring and stop manipulating the situation. Some even offered to help with Lily's basic needs if the heirloom was returned. That surprised me. I hadn't expected anyone to step in like that. 3 days later, the attorney called to tell me Linda had dropped the ring off at their office without a word. I asked them to give it directly to my grandmother's sister. It belonged with her now. That evening, my aunt called to tell me several family members had set up a small fund to help Lily with essentials. She was careful to say it didn't excuse Linda's behavior, but they didn't want the baby to suffer. I thanked her, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Knowing Lily wouldn't be completely unsupported eased a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged, carrying with that chapter closing. I turned my attention back to the wedding. Rachel called to schedule our final planning session, and when I walked into her office, everything was laid out with meticulous care. Seating charts, timelines, floral mock-ups. For the first time, I felt excitement instead of anxiety. This wedding felt like mine, not something shaped by someone else's expectations. Deep burgundy linens, cream roses, warm lights. Every detail reflected my taste, my choices. Dress shopping with Olivia a few weeks later almost derailed me when I briefly mistook a stranger with a baby for Linda. Panic flared in my chest before logic caught up. Olivia squeezed my hand and reminded me that we'd taken precautions. Security would be there. Linda had no power here. 20 minutes later, I found my dress. Clean lines, modern, strong. I barely recognized the woman in the mirror, and for once, that felt like a good thing. As the wedding drew closer, I worried briefly about the empty mother-of-doll bride seat. Dr. Harris helped me reframe it. That empty chair wasn't a symbol of loss, he said. It was proof of growth. Choosing peace over obligation. Protecting myself even when it was uncomfortable. By the time I left his office that day, I could picture the ceremony clearly, and the absence didn't feel like a wound anymore. A week before the wedding, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a photo of Lily, smiling, her eyes unmistakably like mine. Linda's handwriting filled a small card with just a few words about her name. I stared at the photo for a long time, emotions colliding in ways I wasn't ready to sort out. Ethan held me while I cried, not telling me what to feel or what to do. I tucked the photo away, not destroyed, not displayed, just held in reserve. 3 weeks before the wedding, my aunt called again, frustrated. Linda had been calling relatives, trying to convince them to pressure me into inviting her. I sent a clear email to every guest, stating Linda was not invited and security would enforce it. The responses came quickly, all supportive. Not one person argued. That support carried me through the final days of preparation, grounding me as everything finally began to feel real. The final 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a strange calm that I hadn't expected. After everything I'd been through, I assumed I'd be a bundle of nerves, waiting for the next disruption, the next attempt by Linda to force her way back into my life. Instead, I felt steady, focused. It was as if drawing that final, unmistakable line had finally convinced my body that the danger had passed. Rachel's emails came daily with small updates and confirmations, and each one made the day feel more real instead of more stressful. The last dress fitting happened on a quiet Saturday morning. Olivia met me at the boutique, coffee in hand, already misty-eyed before I'd even stepped into the fitting room. When I put the dress on and turned toward the mirror, something settled deep in my chest. The fit was perfect, but more than that, I recognized myself. Not the version of me who once ignored red flags because she wanted a fairy tale, but the woman who had survived betrayal and still chose softness where it mattered. Olivia cried openly, telling me how proud she was, how much I'd grown, and for once I believed her without brushing it off. That evening, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table eating takeout, surrounded by last-minute checklists. He reached across the table and took my hand, asking gently how I was feeling about everything. I admitted there was still a small knot of worry about Linda trying something dramatic at the last minute. He didn't dismiss it or tell me to relax. He reminded me that we'd done everything we could, that security had her photo, the vendors were informed, and the family was unified. His calm confidence steadied me in a way, words alone, COULDN single quotes. The night before the wedding, we held a small rehearsal dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown. Candles flickered on white tablecloths, and the room buzzed with laughter. Ethan's parents stood to give a toast, welcoming me into their family with a warmth that nearly brought me to tears. I looked around the table at people who showed up for me, who believed me, who respected my boundaries without questioning them. The empty chair where my mother might have sat no longer felt like a wound. It felt like proof that I'd chosen myself. When I went to bed that night, I slept deeply. No nightmares, no anxious jolts awake. Just rest. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm, sunlight streaming through the hotel suite windows. Olivia arrived first with coffee and bagels, followed quickly by my bridesmaids. The room filled with the hum of hair tools, music, and easy conversation. There was no tension, no hovering criticism, no constant correction. I realized how different this felt from the first wedding that never happened. When Linda had tried to control every detail as the stylist worked, I caught my reflection in the mirror and felt something close to peace. The photographer arrived and began capturing quiet moments, laughter, small touches. When it was time to step into my dress, Olivia helped fasten the buttons with reverence. Like she understood this wasn't just fabric, but a symbol of survival. I took a deep breath and looked at myself one last time before leaving the room, feeling ready in a way I never had before. The ceremony took place in a garden behind the venue. White chairs lined neatly beneath an arch of deep burgundy flowers and soft cream roses. My uncle walked me down the aisle, his arm steady and reassuring. When I saw Ethan waiting at the front, his face lit with emotion. The rest of the world seemed to fade. Every painful step that had brought me here suddenly felt worth it. We stood together, hands trembling slightly, and spoke vows we'd written ourselves, promises rooted in honesty, respect, and partnership. At the reception, the room glowed with warm light and genuine joy. Guests hugged me, telling me how radiant I looked, how happy they were to see me thriving. My aunt pulled me aside briefly to tell me Linda had tried calling her that morning and had been ignored. She wanted me to know the family stood firmly behind me. I thanked her and felt a wave of gratitude, so strong it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. Olivia's maid of honor speech was equal parts humor and heart. She talked about watching me rebuild my life piece by piece, about resilience and choosing self-respect over comfort. There were tears around the room, including mine. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, his presence grounding me in the moment. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as someone's daughter or someone's fiancé, but as myself. As the evening wore on, I found my thoughts drifting briefly to Lily. I wondered what kind of world she'd grow up in, what stories she'd be told, what she might one day ask about me. There was sadness there, but not regret. I knew I'd made the right choices for my own peace. If one day I chose to open that door, it would be because I wanted to, not because I was forced. The night ended with a sparkler send-off, laughter echoing as Ethan and I walked hand in hand through a tunnel of light. As we drove away, I looked back once, then forward, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of my mother's competition, her betrayal, her constant attempts to control my life, all of it finally felt behind me. 3 days later, we boarded a plane for Italy. The moment we landed, the air felt different, like a clean slate. We spent our honeymoon wandering through small towns, sharing meals under string lights, talking about the future in a way that felt open instead of pressured. One evening, sitting on a terrace overlooking vineyards, Ethan asked what I wanted the next chapter of my life to look like. I told him I wanted balance, joy, and choices made from desire instead of obligation. He smiled and said he wanted the same. On our last day, standing together on a hillside overlooking miles of countryside, I thought about the woman I'd been when Linda pulled me aside years ago and shattered my world. I barely recognized her now. That version of me had survived something devastating, but she hadn't known yet how strong she was. As Ethan wrapped his arms around me, I realized that my story wasn't defined by betrayal anymore. It was defined by what I chose to build after it. We returned home from Italy exhausted in the best possible way, carrying suitcases that smelled faintly of wine and lavender and a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The cats greeted us at the door like we'd been gone a lifetime, weaving around our legs and demanding immediate attention. Ethan laughed as he dropped the bags and scooped one of them up, and I remember thinking how natural it felt. How easily he fit into the life I'd built brick by brick after everything fell apart. Our townhouse felt different somehow, warmer, like it finally reflected who I was, instead of who I was trying to be. A few days later, I went back to work, slipping into my routine with a quiet confidence that surprised my coworkers. During lunch breaks, I caught myself smiling for no reason, grounded in the knowledge that my life was finally aligned with my values. In the evenings, Ethan and I cooked simple dinners, talked about our days, and planned small things like weekend hikes or which photos to frame next. There was no chaos, no drama, no need to defend myself. Peace, I learned, could be surprisingly quiet. 6 months into married life, that peace had settled deep into my bones. One Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of Ethan talking to the cats in the kitchen, negotiating breakfast like it was a serious diplomatic matter. He handed me a mug of coffee without asking how I took it, and we sat together reading the news and planning nothing more exciting than errands and a movie later that night. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was real, and it felt better than any fantasy I'd once chased. Linda didn't disappear entirely, but she faded into the background of my life. Occasionally, I'd hear through family that she was struggling, still framing herself as the victim, still insisting she'd been wronged rather than acknowledging what she'd done. I no longer felt the urge to correct her narrative. I'd learned that silence could be a boundary just as firm as any confrontation. My family respected that now, and most importantly, so did I. Once, while scrolling absent-mindedly, I saw a new photo of Lily posted by a distant cousin. She was sitting upright, eyes bright, hair curling softly at her temples. The resemblance still caught me off guard. I paused, felt the familiar ache, and then let it pass. I didn't reach out, but I didn't punish myself for caring either. Dr. Harris had helped me understand that compassion didn't require self-sacrifice, and that truth stayed with me. Therapy shifted from crisis management to maintenance, a space to reflect instead of survive. One afternoon, I told Dr. Harris that I finally felt like my mother's betrayal was no longer the center of my story. It was something that had happened, something that shaped me, but it wasn't the headline anymore. He smiled and said that was often how real healing looked, not erasure but integration. I left his office that day feeling lighter, more whole. Ethan noticed the change too. One night, as we cleaned up after dinner, he told me how proud he was of the life we were building together. He said he admired how I'd chosen integrity over comfort, even when it cost me deeply. Hearing that from him mattered in a way I couldn't fully explain. With Jason, I'd always felt like I had to minimize myself to keep the peace. With Ethan, there was no shrinking, only standing tall. On our anniversary, we went back to the hiking trail where we'd first met. The air was crisp, the path familiar, and as we walked, I thought about how unlikely it all seemed. If my mother hadn't betrayed me in the most devastating way imaginable, I might have stayed in a life that never truly fit. I didn't feel grateful for the pain, but I felt proud of what I'd built in spite of it. There's a difference, and it matters. That night, curled up on the couch with the cats piled between us, I reflected on the empty chair at my wedding. What once felt like absence now felt like intention. I hadn't lost a mother. I'd released a source of harm. In its place, I'd gained clarity, stability, and a partnership rooted in respect. The day I'd deserved all along hadn't come from forcing forgiveness or pretending things were fine. It came from choosing myself, over and over. Until it finally felt natural, my story didn't end with reconciliation or dramatic apologies. It ended with boundaries held, a life rebuilt, and love chosen wisely. And for the first time, that ending felt exactly right.